Hi, Adam. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Appreciate you having me.
So happy you're here. So, you are a personal transformation coach, which really can mean a lot of things to different people depending on sort of what we're talking about. And you just shared with me that you were originally from Toronto and
Yeah.
you moved to BC, British Columbia in Canada. And so, what inspired you to do that? Before we begin and before I introduce you and who you are, I'm just super curious why you would leave Toronto and move
Yeah.
to BC.
Yeah, I had my rock bottom burnt out moment in Toronto, and I just got very lucky. I discovered a sport that inspired me and was teaching me how to. And I appreciate the idea of falling in love with fitness. I found that sport that allowed me to understand what it means to fall in love with myself, and that was rock climbing. And so I was like, okay, well, where's the best place to do more rock climbing? And that's what drove me out to BC.
Amazing. And how long ago was that?
That's 20 years ago. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, 2002, I left Toronto. And yeah, I set up my roots originally in a small town called Golden, BC, which is a very popular place for really diving deeper into that side of sport. The idea of being a mountain climber and a certified rock climbing guide was my aspirations. And
Amazing.
yeah, and then eventually now been in Squamish, BC for the last 15 years.
Wow. And so is this before you became a transformational coach, or was your burnout sort of the trigger that kind of started it all?
Yeah, that was the trigger that started it all. I was at that moment in my mid 20s. I'm 50 now. I just turned 50 a few months ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Don't look
yeah.
it,
Well,
Adam.
what's
Damn,
that?
doing good. You don't look it at all.
Yeah, well, again, it's knowing that I have the right systems in place for me to manage my wellness in a way that's flows for my busy life. As a dad of two and a coach, busy coach and business owner, it's hard to manage the responsibilities if we don't know how to work with our own energy. And that was pretty apparent to me in my 20s, where I had no clue how to work with my own daily anxiety, my depression, my ADHD. The point of no return for me was when I became pre-diabetic from
Mm.
having a very heavy sugar addiction. And yeah, so that for me it was living this life where I was following what I was always told was how we're supposed to do things. You go to school, you get your degree, you get your nice piece of paper, then you go out and you find that job and you get the house, you have the kids, and you're supposed to live happily ever after. But somewhere on that path for me, it started to crumble. My health started to crumble, and the pressure became pretty heavy for sure.
Mm. So this resonates a lot with me because actually at the end of last year I also had a burnout. It was my first burnout. I
Mm,
never experienced this. I'd always read on it and I knew the symptoms like according to, what the information the literature said. However, I never actually experienced it myself. And so for me, it was this thing that slowly creeped up on me. And
mm,
it got to a point where I started to actually feel like an internal heat at all times. And the smallest little things that would normally not stress me out became extremely stressful to me. Even the
yeah.
way that I reacted to them was so exaggerated. And it got to a point where I was then physically ill. All of a sudden, my body shut down. This was actually at the end of last year. I went to a Tony Robbins
Mm,
event. It was Date with Destiny, and it was just so many people, and it was such long hours. I got super ill, and there was just
mm,
a lot going on in my personal life, a lot going on in my work life, and all of a sudden, it was overnight that my body just shut down. My system shut down. I,
yeah.
I couldn't get out of bed. And for anyone who hasn't gone through a burnout, can you maybe describe a little bit around your experience? What led up to it, and how did you know that that was a burnout, and how did you overcome and manage that?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I know it's a very common experience. I predominantly work with busy parents in terms of my coaching practice, and it's very common. It's like the story of the frog and plopping it in boiling water, and
Mm.
or you slowly raise the temperature, and there's an element of our experience around our own health and wellness that tends to be in a somewhat of a numbing space or in high adrenaline where we're just constantly overdrive to get things done, and we don't realize that the amount of symptoms we're suffering from are trying to tell us to take a step back. But yet the only way we know how to keep going is to just keep plowing, keep plowing, keep plowing. And eventually your mind and your body are going to crumble from that.
Mm,
And for me, when I went through that experience, I mean, I grew up right from a young age. I was diagnosed ADHD, told I was learning disabled, put on Ritalin.
mm,
No fault of my parents. They didn't know what to do for me. And there was a lot of self-esteem, self-worth, shame, a lot of guilt around that experience. And my mind, and like all our minds, the mind is a beautiful organ, but it does love to feed off of our fight or flight stress response. And so, not knowing how to manage my own mind at the time and how to teach my mind to not do that, it just became this very dark experience where I had, on average, we have 70,000 thoughts a day. And so a large part of my mindset was locked in these self-loathing thoughts. And as I got older, and I noticed as I entered into adulthood and started to have all the adult life stressors, which is our predominantly four areas: our health, our finances, our career, and our relationships. My brain further was learning from those stressors, and it was starting to create all these thoughts about my relationships, all these thoughts about my health. And it became very hard to find a way out and understand how can I actually start to take care of where I'm at, because there was nothing I was doing in terms of what I was being told around my health that was working.
mm,
All I kept being told was, okay, another diet, another fitness program, another meditation, another yoga, another medication. Okay, I'm not knocking those things, but for me, it's just none of it got me to a place where I could work with my own relationship with my own brain.
mm.
Really understand how can I nourish my brain so it didn't lock me into this fight or flight stress response that I was so stuck in.
Right.
And that's a large part of where I know that many of us are feeling that pressure every day.
Right, right. And again, also not to mock any of these strategies because it does work for some people. However, for me, as I hear you speaking and sharing, all I can see is just us putting a band-aid on the problem, right? It's treating the symptoms but not really treating the cause root as to why these symptoms are constantly there. And I
Yeah.
think also a lot of that just comes from our environment, right? And especially when we are conditioned in the North American environment or the Western environment to work really hard. You're congratulated when you work super hard. You're congratulated when you sleep less. You're congratulated when you are working on the weekends, and you're such a badass for doing all that. And
Yeah.
so, how did you then come into that place where you decided that there is an impact of these thoughts on the emotion, and then the emotion is driving the behavior? And how did you get to that place where you started to make positive changes, where you actually got to the root cause of that problem?
Well, this is where the climbing came in.
Uh,
So, I was overweight and again suffering, being pre-diabetic, and with all the anxiety. I was downtown Toronto, just looking for something else to do health wise, fitness wise. And I didn't want to buy another gym membership because, again, for me and my own experience, that my brain always locked into the guilt and frustration around that, where I would miss a day or miss a week and I would feel so bad about myself. I was downtown rollerblading around with a friend of mine. We both were looking for an alternative fitness activity, and rollerblading was okay. Let's try this a little bit. And as we were rollerblading around, we stumbled upon an indoor rock climbing gym,
mm,
and something about that intrigued me. I was like, "Whoa, this is interesting." I'm scared of heights, for one,
ha,
right? But there's something about the energy in that place that when we walked in, I could feel it. I was like, "Wow, there's something interesting in this." In this building. This was a place called Joe Rockheads, really popular. So a lot of young folks at the time, and I felt, a little bit isolated, a little bit lonely. So it was all of a sudden there was also this community aspect that I could feel was interesting around that sport. But the first time I ever, immediately me and my friend said, "Yeah, let's try it." We signed up and we went for a session, and I got halfway up my first climb and I had a panic attack and was yelling at my buddy, "Let me down, let me down. This is too scary." But there was something that I felt that was different from anything else I'd ever tried before. And it got me to come back and then come back and come back. And next thing I knew, a month or two later, I was going 3-4 days a week. And
mm,
what it was the ability to feel space from my own mind, the
mm,
ability to not hear the incessant 70,000 thoughts a day telling me about my life and how my life is crumbling and what are you going to do about it and how you got to fix things. And, just that constant anxiety was gone, but I could only access it when I climbed. And so I started to realize, okay, there's something about climbing that's making me feel good. It's helping me to feel more nourished mentally, physically. And so that's when I chose to overhaul my life for climbing.
Mm, wow.
Now, I did learn biologically what it was I was doing years later, which became my coaching practice. And, I've been doing that side of it for 15 years. But initially, it was an all in addiction to climbing because it was the only thing I knew that was giving me relief from my anxiety and my stress from life.
Wow. Wow. So powerful, and so much to unpack here. And so this is what I see, because it's so interesting when we're trying to create a transformation in our life, whether that's overcoming debilitating, self-sabotaging thoughts or trying to implement new habits. What's super interesting is the more we try to resist what we want to remove, the more we want to stop whatever it is that we are not liking that we're doing, the harder it is. So right now here in Montreal, it's springtime, and right now I see all the dandelions and the weeds growing in my garden, right? So if I can go out every single day and de-weed my garden, what's going to happen? Right? The weeds are just going to come back, and I'm just going to be at this every single day until eventually I give up, because they are going to win. Like, that's what's going to happen. They're going to win. And so what I learned is that if you actually put more grass seeds in your lawn and you put more fertilizer and you put more soil, that's actually how you can have really beautiful, healthy grass without having to worry about the weeds. And what ends up happening is that grass seeds overtake the weeds. So this is what I hear you saying, and maybe you can expand on that a little bit if that sounds like this is where you're getting to.
Yeah. I mean, there was an element of what I began to recognize as a manifestation of this new energy that climbing was giving me. It was allowing me to feel more peaceful, more calm, so that in my everyday life, when I was feeling anxious, I could feel the anxiety in a more heightened way than I ever could before.
Mm.
And I recognized, okay, so if climbing is allowing me to help process stress and help me build a more nourishing relationship between my brain and my nervous system, what if I was to start to do that into the other areas of my life? And it became this idea of, what can I add in? What can I add in that's going to help bring more of this feeling, more light, versus restrictions and fixing and, problem solving, like you're talking about. It's such an energy that will continue to manifest more of the emotion attached to that.
Absolutely.
And so I started to realize that, wow, I can actually shift my emotions if I can create a moment of pause between what my brain is up to and my reaction to my mind. And I recognize that, wow, I can actually expand that space. I don't have to react to everything so quickly. As the thought comes in, next thing you know, you've already got the sugar in your mouth and you're feeling miserable about yourself. Well, I can actually pause while I have the sugar in my hand and do the work in that moment and bring the love in, and still have the choice to choose the things that don't serve you. But the more I started to create these pauses in these moments that I was feeling this anxiety or this stress, it gave me this option to choose love versus choose the punishment side of it.
Right. Right. So amazing. Okay, so what I also hear you say is you're creating more awareness around the situation. So you're consciously looking at this whole behavior pattern versus just being sort of stuck in the cycle, and the cycle, which is ultimately self-sabotage. I love that you use the word love and punishment, because that actually is what we're doing. So when our thoughts are overriding our emotions, and at that very moment where we're feeling whatever we're feeling, the thoughts are, okay, have this thing, and just do whatever it takes to numb this emotion. And so maybe you can explain a little bit more around how you were able to take that pause, because for a lot of us, especially as soon as we're triggered, it's so hard to break that cycle. So what would be the
Yeah.
first step towards that?
Yeah. And this is part of, I have this roadmap, 6-step roadmap that I share with all my clients. And um, it's called the Unleash Your Energy Roadmap. Um, the first step is being able to start to notice the patterns of your own mind,
Mm,
because that is the access to all of it. And if we recognize that the brain is such a beautiful organ, but yet we have never been taught how to nourish it properly.
Right.
especially in modern society. And so as the brain, like a computer system, it's always learning, and it always wants to be fed energy.
Mm.
As a survival organ, it wants energy. And so it learns from how you interact with your own life of where it can get its energy from.
Mm.
And it learns pretty quick, right from a young age, that adrenaline happens to be its number one source of energy. Known as the surge of energy, comes from the stress response, the hormonal release of adrenaline when you are in a fight or flight or anxious moment. It learns that from a young age. So again, you have that experience as a child where you're bullied, or let's say you have your first breakup, or you get yelled at for some experience, and you get triggered by that. Your brain is learning from that.
Mm.
When I got diagnosed ADHD and told I was learning disabled, boom, my brain was like, wow, I feel that adrenaline. I'm going to lock thoughts about that to keep feeding off of your adrenaline from that. So I
Mm.
didn't realize that. And, as we get older, all of a sudden now we have all these pattern ways of thinking because the brain has us locked into these moments to try to get fed the adrenaline. And it loves to get us to go after our self-sabotaging habits,
Mm.
because the majority of those habits are dopamine-based habits. Dopamine, neurotransmitter, also defined as the voltage of the brain. So those are the two dominant sources of energy that the brain likes to use as its survival energy. Now, if we know that and we can recognize, wow, okay, so most of what I've been doing is just reacting, hearing these thoughts in my head, identifying as them. Okay, I'm a loser. I don't know how to get fit. I'm so unhealthy. It's like, when's it ever going to be my turn? It's a pretty dark place to live from. If we recognize those patterns and then start to pick one or two to work with, to teach the brain to let go of the use of your stress response around them, that for me was when I started to find relief.
Mm.
And so in that process, I started to look again, climbing. Okay, so climbing is a real fight or flight experience. You have to manage your stress response or you can die. It's a very safe sport, but it does require your presence.
Mm.
And so from spending years and years and years climbing and being high up on the side of these beautiful mountains and cliffs and having panic attacks, and recognizing that if I do a very particular practice, I can reset my nervous system in those moments. I can regulate my stress response and bring myself back into this beautiful center of being focused, of being fit, of being strong, where I could just, again, I could proceed on the climb in a way where I've got all my energy back. And I was like, man, there's something about this that I'm doing when I'm here in these moments that I'm able to reset this with my breath. And it takes less than a minute to do. Okay, well, how come, and I'm not knocking therapy and counseling, but how come no therapist, all these years that I've suffered with anxiety and put on ADHD medication, how come nobody told me I could teach my brain to let go of these thoughts? Okay, so then I started to look at the other areas of my life that I was anxious. First one I turned this practice to was sugar.
Mm.
Still being highly addicted to sugar back then. And I said, okay, so this breath practice that I'm doing, there's something about it. First, let me research it. What is this breath practice? And then two, where else in my life can I bring this breath practice in to help transform my relationship with all these other things that create a reaction and have my brain locked into these pattern ways of thinking? And that was really at the core of my transformation, and has been and still continues to be, and is what all my clients utilize as their only primary focuses in the moments of life, working with your own mind around something to teach it to let go, to give you space for being present in the moment so that you have more choice.
So so good. I love that so much. So
Right? And there's an access to that. I mean, when you learn how to do that and you learn how to do that well, you build strength. And so your initial question was in terms of how do you do that, and what's the mechanism for it all? And it's all around strengthening the vagus nerve, learning how to, like any muscle that you want to build, you have to train your vagus nerve to be what's called coherent. You need it to be in a place of coherence. The only way to do that is to continue to bring presence to it with the utilization of your breath. And it's not about meditation. Listen, meditation is awesome. We know there's tons of benefit from it. Not for me. It never worked for me. It always left me feeling frustrated, feeling more guilty. My brain just would not allow it. But as I brought this really powerful breath practice, and I call it heart flow, and it takes 33 seconds to do. As I trained myself using that breath practice, all of a sudden it became easier to recognize how I can extend my ability to live with more presence. The more I was committed to practicing this 33-second breath practice in the moments that I was feeling triggered. As long as I did that, all of a sudden more presence showed up, more presence, which allowed the manifestation of more things to continue to allow me to feel the ways that I wanted to feel, that I didn't even realize I could feel that way. I started to learn how to feel that way. And then more and more opportunities showed up that I call it extending the act of love. And food was the first one that showed up. It just was like, wow, now I'm playing with food in a way that I know it's a manifestation because of how I'm treating myself.
So good. So good. So in just a moment, I'm actually going to ask you to maybe walk us through maybe one of the episodes where you felt like having sugar, or you had sugar in your hand, and how you applied that 33-second breath work, or what did you call it?
Heart flow.
Heart flow
Yeah.
to pattern interrupt. So I really believe that transformation happens in the present moment. And most of us are stuck in the past because all of our thoughts are really experiences of the past that are projecting the future. And we're always focused and stressed and worried and disappointed in ourselves over things that we've done in the past. And when it comes to health and fitness, I can definitely tell you that anybody who's tried diets many times, or who's tried many attempts over and over again to release weight or to transform their body, when these attempts are failed, that leaves a memory, and that they're stuck in that place in the past where it never worked for them. And then
Yeah.
their goals are set up in the future, and this is really focused on a particular state that they're going to have in the future once they arrive at that goal. Once I'm 20 pounds lighter, then I'll be happy. Once I'm 30 pounds lighter, then I'll get the guy. And so their happiness is also contingent then on whatever state they're going to be in the future if they do accomplish that goal. So I love that you brought the present and the present moment into this whole conversation, because if we're able to harness the emotions that we want to constantly live in, whatever the goal is that we want to create, what are the emotions around that? And if I can harness those emotions in the present moment and live my life and my goals constantly in the present moment, focusing on those emotions, I can create transformation.
It happens automatically when you know how to do that.
100%. Oh, I love this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so Adam, now walk us through that little experience that you shared earlier and how you added that heart flow into it.
Yeah. And so again, I'm up in the middle of the rock having a complete panic attack, hundreds of feet of exposure down below. So I have to reset this. I have to. 33 seconds. And what I learned from this is that it has to be a very clean rhythm. So I'm doing 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out. We know there's thousands of breath practices. This is one that just worked for me. And then as I did the research, I realized it's based off of what's known as heart rate variability, HRV. And so the fact that you can reset and build toning of your vagus nerve in 33 seconds, it's like, okay, like I said, now where else can I bring this in? And the thing is that I snuffed out emotions from a very young age. My mind and the way it was producing thoughts and telling me to do certain things was in a way where I didn't want to feel, because I was, whatever it was I went through as a child, whether we label it traumatic or not, does not matter. What matters is that my brain, as a survival mechanism, taught me not to feel. And so all of a sudden, here I am using this breath practice every day, all day long, climbing, and I'm starting to feel again. It's like, whoa, this is beautiful. Like, it feels really nice. Okay, now I want to bring it in these other areas. So the first, like I mentioned, the first one was sugar. And so I love cookies. I still do. This is not about perfection. I still eat chocolate. I still drink beer. I still do all the things, but they don't control me like they did. And so at the time, though, I was still pre-diabetic. And I would have my brain would lock in and go, okay, it's cookie time, Adam, go get the cookies. And I would rush to the cupboard and grab the bag of cookies and just start eating them. Now, that's my normal routine is I would go through probably 3, 4, 5 cookies and then realize, whoa, like that just happened quickly. Okay. So now what I started to do is I said, okay, I already know that all the diets I've ever been on left me feeling, again, frustrated and guilty. I'm not going to restrict myself. I'm just going to create this moment of pause. I'm going to do heart flow in that moment, holding the cookies in my hand. Just close my eyes, put my hand on my heart, which is part of the heart flow process. Just bring myself back to the parasympathetic nervous system, the calm, rest, and digest. And while I'm doing that, I learned over time to also connect to the emotional feeling of how I want to feel. How
Mm.
do I want to be in this moment? How do I want to feel in this moment? And now I have the choice at the end of those 33 seconds to still choose the cookie if I want.
Mm.
Freedom to still choose it. And I would still choose it. But the more that I did it, the more I was stopping my brain from getting the immediate adrenaline from the rush and the dopamine from and cortisol and also glucose from the sugar. So it created this pause where the brain realized it wasn't getting the same reactivity out of me.
Mm.
And it also allowed me to feel the feelings of what I wanted to feel, which began to manifest more of that opportunity into my life, where the sugar craving started to transform into the craving for what else was showing up.
Right.
And eventually my brain let go of the sugar as a source because I was no longer being reactive to it. And the brain, being as efficient as it is, will not produce thoughts in that way if you stop reacting to them.
Mm.
It'll let go, this is all, in terms of habit transformation. This is the key to habit transformation, is working with your nervous system in a way where you can teach your brain to let go of the habit, but it doesn't like it.
Right. Oh, so good. So you help people then overcome sugar addiction and I guess any other form of addiction. I would imagine that this would even work with shopping or with gambling. Anything that really, like you said, is responsible for that dopamine surge that we get
Yeah.
from doing that thing, right?
Yeah.
And so you would use the exact same process, correct?
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. The initial process is, number one, is we have to map out your own mind. Where in your life do you notice your mind is creating a disruption? Is it about your partner? Like I mentioned, I work primarily with parents. So there's a lot of resenting communication, resentfulness, which comes from the brain, just learning that your partner's a source of stress. Yay, my partner. I can use my partner to get triggers and get more adrenaline.
Right.
Okay. So let's map where you notice your partner as a source. Okay. Now your kids are a huge source for the brain to create disruption. And as I know you have the knowledge around this. There's very little presence in parenting right now, which is such a key part of how we as parents need to show up. So then once you start to recognize, okay, these are the places I'm disrupted, you just start to pick one or two that you're really committed to then practicing heart flow around in
Hmm.
the moments. And it starts to give you this beautiful space to transform that reactivity into what it can be based off of what you now decide you want it to be. So
Hmm.
that's step three, is you have to start to craft your emotions in terms of what you do want.
Right.
And that takes some work because we often don't know what that is. We're so good at being locked in what we don't want and being triggered that we don't have enough time and focus and energy towards how we do want to feel. So there's a whole process on engaging that. And then it's bringing it into your life in a way where you're able to build even more resilience around all those other areas of our holistic wellness. So once you have this more nourishing relationship between your nervous system and your brain, now you can look at nutrition. Now you can look at sleep. Now you can look at fitness and all these other areas in a way where you can manage your brain's response to those in a way where you can manifest what's right for you in those areas in a way where you have this lifelong resilience around your own daily vitality.
So good. So you tapped into something so important because I'll say maybe 95% of the athletes, I call my clients athletes that I work with, the moment I ask them, well, what do you want? And to your point, the response is, well, I don't want to be in pain anymore, and I don't want, my knees to hurt anymore, and I want to be able to, and so they're all always focused on the pain, the things that
Yeah.
they don't want anymore. And that really becomes that place of manifestation, because the more we focus on what we don't want, the more we attract exactly that. And so
Yeah.
when I do ask them, well, what would that day look like once you've achieved all these goals? And they don't know, because they've never really actually thought about what they did want or what that day would look like. And
Yeah.
so, just rewinding a little bit back to when you spoke about manifestation, how do we get to that place where we do start to manifest abundance and we do start to manifest all the beautiful things in our lives
Yeah.
without all of that resistance and that negative self talk?
Yeah. So here's the missing link on law of attraction. And I can appreciate all the information that's out there. I do know that having spent all those years working with my own nervous system in a real fight or flight scenario has given me a real advantage on the understanding of manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
The nervous system is the portal to what you're manifesting, and you're manifesting based off of the frequency of your emotions. Okay. So if we know that, and that's the reality, and it is, quantum physics works in energy, works in vibration, works in frequency, and it's coming from your nervous system. Okay. Yes, there's a huge part of the heart that is part of the equation, but the heart is regulated with the nervous system in the most beautiful way. But yet the brain kind of cuts us off from the whole dynamic of that relationship. So all we need to do is start to understand how easily we can work with our own mind to take some of those 70,000 thoughts, start to dissipate some of the patterns that have us locked up there so that we can start to connect downward and bring the emotional frequency back into the it's like the thermostat, bring it to the temperature of what we do want, so that we begin to recognize, oh, wow, I can actually have it be that way, because now here it comes. The process is difficult, one, because it's not a feeling we've really understood or had for long stretches in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
You ask anybody, do you understand what it feels like to be in a state of growth, or be in a state of self-love, or be in a state of natural flow? Oh yeah, I've had moments. And a lot of it's around a birth of a child, or maybe it's fitness in some capacity, and fitness is a great one for giving you access. But that's the feeling that you're after. And then it's, how do you cultivate the ability to extend your time engaging with that emotion?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're after, is the more that you can start to build your daily routine immersed in the emotions of how you want to feel and how you like things to be, it all just starts to show up around you in a way where you just have to keep taking action when it shows up. It's not like you sit on the couch and do nothing, but as it shows up, like for me, all of a sudden it showed up that I started to play in my kitchen with all these different plant-based foods. And I was like, wow, I didn't grow up being good in the kitchen. All of a sudden here I am with a best-selling cookbook. How did that happen? It happened because I honored the energy around it and kept being in action for what was inspiring me, what was motivating me. And that began to show up in all the areas of my life simultaneously, because that's how this works. Every thought that we think and every word that we say has a vibration attached to it.
Yes.
And if you let your brain be the one that guides how your life is, you're going to know where you are because of your symptoms. Your symptoms do not lie, mentally and physically. If you're feeling depleted and brain fogged and lacking motivation, and you're physically inflamed and really, chronic fatigued, and you have cravings, it's all coming from the relationship between your brain and your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn how to create space for your nervous system to teach your brain to feel safe and feel loved, you're going to have access to your emotional frequency in a way that most people will never have in their lives. That's life transformation.
Wow. So good. So good. And, just another layer I want to add around the law of attraction, and I'm so curious to hear what you think of this, is I actually think that, yes, I agree with you. We do have, through our emotions, through our feelings, that ability to tune into the frequency, the resonance of what it is that we want to attract. But I always feel that it's something that has always been there. Joy and abundance is always there, and that's the whole definition of abundance, is that it's there, it's limitless, it's constant expansion. And when you look at a child, I know you're a father, but you look at your child, they're born happy, they're born with joy. And that's the natural default emotion of our existence and how we came into the world. And if you're a pet owner, you also see that, right? And what we actually end up doing through our childhood and through limiting beliefs and through our experiences in life is we create resistance. We create resistance to this natural emotion that's always there. And it's our job to release that resistance through the work that you do and really just tune into what's actually always there, what's always been there, and how we can, from that space, attract absolutely anything into our lives.
Yeah. The key is to just recognize that the first step is you want to learn what it feels like to feel with and experience life with a little more peace and a little more calm. It's kind of step one. Just start to recognize that as an opportunity for how you can engage your life. And that happens relatively quick when you start to train the vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm.
You start to feel more peaceful in certain scenarios where normally you would be ready for a battle. Okay. But you just have to recognize, okay, I'm creating this. I'm creating that feeling. Great. Now you want to learn to expand it and learn to expand it and learn to expand it and learn to embrace this new emotion that your brain is going to be threatened by.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the structure, the support needs to be there. I mean, a big part of why we suffer the way we suffer in modern culture is because we are so isolated. We're so lonely in many cases. And the solutions that we're tuning into aren't getting us to get comfortable with an emotional state of how we do want to be,
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to strengthen that as the dominant way that we take action from. And so that all comes from just giving yourself a little bit of space between what your thoughts are and what you're acting on next. And in that space, if you become the master of those few seconds, you have and it's not about control, but you just have choice. You have choice in almost every moment to have it be the way you want it to be, because it's the feeling that you're using as your barometer on what you should do next. And when it doesn't feel right, natural gut intuition, you'll have a moment to say, wait a minute, okay, that's actually not feeling quite right. I want to go that way with the emotion attached that goes that way. But again, when we're up here all the time and we don't even realize we are, you just can't play with the nervous system in that way. And it's the most powerful thing that we have. It's our superpowers.
Love this. I love this conversation so much, Adam. You are amazing. You're just this beautiful light, and I just love
Awesome.
this talk, and especially talking about this because I really believe that this is where transformation is at, and just really learning the way the brain works, the way that we respond to certain thoughts simply by just repeating them over and over again and just being stuck in that loop. And so, is there anything else that you wanted to share today as we wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, there is that element of discussing the cultural norms around this. I think there's an element of normalcy around us being in anxiety all the time and depression and loneliness and isolation. And, you know, the fear messaging that a lot of us are tuning into, and that's because of social media, predominantly in media. There's an element of that if you can learn to separate from what that constant messaging is, because what happens is in those states, we become mass consumers.
Mm,
And so I know this is a big discussion, but I just wanted to be clear that a large part of why we feel the way we feel is by design.
yeah.
And so you have to recognize that a lot of what we think is normal is actually a massive disruptor of your own nervous system and triggers you into a fight or flight response without you even knowing it's happening. And so social media is a huge one, but we also know processed food is another one. I'm going to be honest here with this one, but artificial light. So the advent of electricity is another one that we don't even realize. We turn on the lights in the morning and you automatically put your nervous system in a fight or flight stress response. So
Mm,
I'm not telling you not to do these things, but what I am saying is when you learn to mitigate
mm,
the outside influences at the same time that you're working with your own mindset, you really do become unstoppable.
mm. Amazing. Thank you so much for this, Adam. So if people wanted to reach out and connect with you, where could they go to do that?
Yeah, you can. I do have that 6-step process, the Unleash Your Energy Roadmap. I have a free PDF for anybody who resonates with this message that you can grab off my website, and that's clearimpact.io, clearimpact.io. And yeah, look forward to connecting with anybody who's ready to take this on.
Thank you so much. Love it. Love it. Have a great rest of your day, Adam.
Thanks, Sherry. Appreciate you having me.